Welcome to the Wirecard Saga,
Season 3.
Lies, Spies, and Corporate Crimes.
Mikhail Ryder Gordon, Managing Director of Institutional Ethics and Integrity at Affiliated Monitors. Over this podcast series, we're going to take a deep dive into the Wirecard Saga to see where it may take us literally across the globe.
The Wirecard Saga is a production of the award-winning Compliance Podcast Network.
Thank you, Tom, and welcome back, listeners. Now, this episode, I catch us up on all the various court case activities because, well, really, the episode right behind this one will pull back the veil, the corporate veil, that is. But before we can get to that, this episode is really to catch everyone up on the recent goings-on with all things Wirecard trial and, well, let's just say the laundromat keeps giving. So, here we go, 10 days of trial, and what have we got thus far? Well, first of all, kudos to the Munich Regional Court. Wirecard proceedings have absolutely swamped the Fourth Grand Criminal Chamber. And I'm not just talking about the Braun-Ballenhaus von Oerfe trial. On the criminal law side, the chamber is responsible for not only the first major indictment on the Wirecard proceedings, and for that there are 5 professional judges, including 2 supplementary, and you've already heard about those, right? The 3 judges plus 2, a bit like your 12 jurors plus 2, and an additional 4 lay assessors, including 2 supplementary lay assessors. But in addition to that, there's an entire support staff, constables, clerks, judicial officers, as well as other administrative personnel. In fact, Wirecard cases have so choked up the Fourth Grand Criminal Chamber, no further new non-Wirecard cases are currently being added to the docket. The court had to actually set up a further white-collar criminal chamber just to hear non-Wirecard cases. That's how full they are. Literally, the Munich Regional Court now has an entire criminal chamber dedicated exclusively to Wirecard cases. The company that just can't stop distinguishing itself at the cost of taxpayers. As the court's own press release has noted, the preparations for this primary hearing within the 4th Criminal Division in Stettener Strasse in particular was a wee bit time-consuming. But it hasn't been just restricted to the criminal court. Over on the civil side, a total of 9 banking chambers and 2 chambers for commercial matters have all been stuck with Wirecard. For example, 2 major proceedings have already been concluded in the 5th chamber for commercial matters, for one of which the court also had to carry out an accreditation procedure. The Munich Regional Court has received a total of 2,251 civil lawsuits in connection with Wirecard's demise. And more than half of these, or 1,178 proceedings, are claims for damages against the auditing firm EY. And folks, this doesn't count all the other lawsuits in other countries, other jurisdictions. This will also include, however, this number does also include the one recently filed by Commerzbank. There's the one seeking approximately 200 million euros in damage from EY, who else? And separately from all these other actions, 407 lawsuits are directed against former CEO Markus Braun, only in the Munich Regional Court. I'm not counting all the other lawsuits against Herr Braun. Is Braun ever going to again see the outside of a courtroom in his lifetime? Does he have the Sitzfleisch? Should have gone to law school, Marcus, yeah? Now, a few proceedings have already been settled, including the very first Wirecard lawsuit, which most of you know about, right? This was the one that showed up in the court back in the spring of 2019, pre-implosion, because that was the action for damages brought by Wirecard, the management board that is, against the FT. Now, a few months after the bankruptcy, Michael Jaffa, the insolvency administrator, right, had that lawsuit withdrawn. But it's really the only one that's concluded outside of the two I mentioned over in this commercial matter chamber. And it could be a long time before the claims for damages against EY are settled. And more on EY in a moment. The other company that just can't seem to quit. A test case is pending before the Bavarian Supreme Court, again outside of Munich. Once the decision has been made there, it will serve as a guideline for the other lawsuits. So remember, this is far from over. Now, over on the civil side, the main action relating to the arrest proceedings against Markus Braun, and those have been decided, but it's currently pending at the Munich Regional Court. If anybody's paying attention, case number 5 HK017452/21. If you're keeping track, that is. Now, deadlines for submission of written pleadings for that case are currently still running. Oh yes, we're only some of the way there on this second case. And remember, there are 406 to go. Now, the oral proceedings on this case against Braun are not expected to begin before fall of this year, 2023. And at present, the proceedings already comprise over 1,000 pages. So much more to come. Now, as the president of Munich's Regional Court, Dr. Beatrix Schobel, has said, quote, "The various Wirecard proceedings are having an impact on us at the Munich Regional Court on many levels." Gee, you think? She went on to say how proud she is of all the members of the court who are helping to cope with the considerable organizational effort required, thanks to the God. And many of the judges, she says, have devoted or are still devoting a large portion of their working time exclusively to Wirecard matters. That is, all those cases for just one dirty company. Really, the court should send a bill to Marsalik and his buddies for the extra court hours and expenses, don't you think? Now, the Munich court has even had to establish an entirely new media transmission room in the Palace of Justice just to accommodate all of the Wirecard proceedings. Yes, German taxpayers, you footed that bill too. So remember to thank all those footloose and fancy-free Wirecard execs who have been allowed to toddle off and start new payment processing companies. That's right, monies that could have been or gone into so many other good uses are being dedicated to keeping the Munich court operating for these literally hundreds, nay thousands, of lawsuits. Now, really, I need an economist to work with me on calculating the true cost to Germany of this corporate disaster. Anyone? All right, so let's turn back to the criminal side of the court, to the trial we have all been following. Recall, we're only 10 days of hearings in. There are 86 more hearings scheduled just for 2023, and these days will only be heard twice a week, so progress is not going to be swift. Let's back up and do a recap, shall we? Day 6 of the trial, Herr Braun, the quiet Vanhoefer, and little Ollie Bellenhaus. And Bellenhaus can't stop yammering, holding fast to his claim that the third-party acquirers were pure fiction. When asked by the court whether the third-party businesses existed, Bellenhaus said, quote, "I answer in no uncertain terms, no." Bellenhaus made specific allegations against Braun, describing in detail the falsification of documents and sales. Quote, "Of course, we came up with that," referring to the escrow accounts in Southeast Asia. I don't want to step on dear Lama Steta's feet here, but I say to that, tosh, rubbish, and oh, tell me another porky pie, Ollie. Those TPAs were alive and laundering as fast as they could move dirty money through accounts. As you'll hear in the next episode, I discuss a recent Irish case that features one of those TPAs. And there was a whole lot of illicit money flowing there. The TPAs and Wirecard worked in tandem to move money all over the world. The TPAs of Wirecard most certainly existed, something the Irish High Court recognized in the related case I'm about to discuss in the episode after this one. But little Ollie here seems to be conveniently forgetting that it was his name, alongside a few others, that was not only on Wirecard Bank's license from the Bank of Ireland in order to operate in that jurisdiction, but on Wirecard UK and Ireland, Wookie, through which TPA proceeds flowed. Ollie, your nose continues to grow. Ah, Fremdschämen. Now, Wookie fielded a bit of money from TPAs in Ireland that subsequently flowed through that Wirecard bank that your name, Oliver, was attached to. Listeners, do try to take in this episode and the next together because they really are conjoined in that the TPAs were very real in the sense that the companies were created for the purpose of running dirty money through them. Piercing the corporate veil of said TPAs will facilitate the recovery of assets for the purposes of providing restitution to, say, all the aggrieved, the loan givers and the vendors defrauded. And, well, there are some other entities little Ollie's name and others are connected to that benefited from this laundering scheme. And now that we have had this precedent-setting case in Ireland, well, that just opens the door to all manner of fun we can have with Herr Bellenhaus and others. I'm spoiling the fun for the next episode. Okay, Bellenhaus, silly old bear, told the Munich court that it was none other than Rüdiger Trautmann who made the initial introductions to the Asian TPAs. And I do have an entire episode in the works on Trautmann and Nokelman. But we need only look at Trautmann's related entities, including TPAs he brokered, to see that they were not fake at all, but companies with active accounts. If only Wirecard Asia VP Ido Kanayawan hadn't skipped out of Singapore, he with an active Interpol red notice, we could hear his version of events. I suppose Kanayawan could be trying to lose himself in the rural hinterlands of his home Indonesia. Though the timing is a bit awkward, as just months after he did his runner, Singapore and Indonesia cut a bilateral extradition treaty. Maybe Kanayawan was able to catch that slow boat to the Philippines, where Bellenhaus claims Ido was well connected. Of course, Bellenhaus claimed Ido brought Tolentino to Wirecard. I don't know that bragging about bringing in Tolentino is something one wants to do. This is the guy that got fired from the Philippine Ministry of Transport for questionable dealings with Duterte's sister, and whom only recently the Philippines Public Attorney's Office Chief Placido Rueda Ocasta slammed for besmirching the good reputation of the PAO. Well, Tolentino is now a Philippine Labour Party candidate, and since the Philippine Department of Justice last year dropped all those charges against him and Marsalic and Judas Seng Young Pei and other Janes and John Does for insufficient evidence, well, he's now a footloose, fancy-free man. Maybe Ido's hanging with him. No doubt he's been given Philippine citizenship by now. I know Bellenhaus talked about meeting with Ido in Dubai, but that was ages ago. Years ago, really. Oh well, soon enough we'll start to get our results from the Singaporean cases against James Agawadhana, Chai I Lim and Si Li Wee, not to mention O'Sullivan and Rajaratnam. So many more sources of information about those Asian TPAs yet to come. Poor Bellenhaus. It's befuddling trying to keep these stories straight. Hard to save one's skin as a witness for the prosecution when one needs conflicting stories to keep the narrative alive. But Bellenhaus kept the drama turned high, describing panic and huge chaos when auditors made inquiries about the TPAs, claiming Wirecard management's only goal was to deceive the auditors. Really? Only goal? Quote, the auditor needed something, and then the panic ensued. Doesn't this sound like the trailer for a horror movie? Bellenhaus went on to say, it was a huge mess. God, he missed his calling on the stage. According to Bellenhaus, Marsalic, von Urfer, and he were personally involved in the falsification of bookings, contracts, logs, and other documents. Personally, I don't know when Marshalik found the time between jetting off with O'Sullivan to the Maldives and Mauritius, meeting co-conspirators in Vienna, nipping over to Russia to see his FSB handlers, hitting the clubs, touring Syria, trafficking stolen classified information to multiple intelligence agencies, club hopping, and stopping by the tailor to have his coat lined in rare fur, oh yeah, and shopping at Tiffany, and having zero financial background. When exactly did he find time to put his personal hand on the falsification of these documents? Did Marshalik have the Tipex out? Was he surfing the net for fonts to use as logos for said fake companies? Bellenhaus then contradicted himself about only the inner circle of Wirecard execs being responsible for the falsification of the TPAs by claiming there was a, quote, technician based in Canada and also in India, who helped them with the falsification of documents. According to Bellenhaus, said technician, reputedly, quote, the best technician Wirecard had. Now he's an inside guy when moments before he was an external person. Oh, do make up your mind, Ollie. Well, supposedly the best technician worked with him, Bellenhaus, Kurnayawan, and Marshalik, I guess he had to put the Tipex down, to falsify, wait for this, 200 million data records. Was each record carefully handcrafted? Have you noticed, listeners, how often the tugged threads lead back to Canada? I should do an episode. I think I will. I think I'll do an episode dedicated to the Canuck connection. At any rate, Bellenhaus then claims Braun personally took care of easing the requirements of the auditors who demanded insight into the TPA documents. Bellenhaus reports that on the KPMG meeting with the Wirecard execs back on October 24th, 2019, remember the topic was the special audit by KPMG triggered by that internal investigation out of Wirecard Asia? Okay, right. So Bellenhaus claims, quote, we didn't have any transaction data that could be presented in any way. Lily, oh, little Ollie, you really should be on the stage. Don't put your son on the stage. So, quote, it was absolutely clear there was no data. Okay, Chicken Little. But according to Bellenhaus, Braun said he spoke to the CEO of KPMG Global, as in the global chairman of KPMG International Limited, the UK limited company? I don't think so. And that it would all be all right. Then across the courtroom, Bellenhaus looks pointedly at Braun and says, it was a pure hoax statement. Ollie didn't quite nail this detail. He was accusing Braun of calling the head of the particular audit and allegedly fixing it with KPMG, and then telling his Wirecard colleagues that the audit wouldn't actually be that bad because he'd fixed it. Now, through all of this, Bellenhaus tells the court he truly yearned for all involved, himself included, that they and the company would just return to behaving what he called legally, a sort of Damascene Road conversion to the path of righteousness. Instead, he claims the alleged fake deals just kept getting bigger. Quote, at some point, you lose control and it was just too late. We lost control. Wirecard, he said, was a money-burning machine and had been consistently losing money since 2013 because the company had been no longer able to cover its spiraling costs. Quote, millions went out. You can't count it that quickly. Oh, Ollie, how vexing. You couldn't count all the laundered money. You longed to do the right thing, yet you claimed the company was hemorrhaging money back to 2013. But for 7 more years you continued to pine not to engage in fraud, but did so anyway? You were still an officer of Wirecard Bank, registered in Ireland and Wookie up until 2020. Being perfectly unverblumt here, I'm not really seeing your reluctance or hesitation to engage in fraud and money laundering over the course of 8+ years. Was it in the way you purchased those sports cars or formed those offshore entities? Was it the reluctance? Is that what you're Was that what you were signing as your conscience? Day 7. Yeah, that was only day 6. We finally hear from von Urfer. Well, not the man, but his counsel. So Sabine Statter, defense counsel for von Urfer, stands up, files another motion to stay the proceedings. Now recall, I told you a couple of episodes back, Braun's counsel, Deerlam, had filed a similar motion straight out of the gate, literally day 2 of the proceedings. Like Deerlam, Statter also accused the public prosecutor of unlawful actions and serious investigative errors, alleging prosecutors of having withheld evidence from the defense statements of key witnesses and suspects that have been available for months. Statter also accused federal investigators of failing to secure an important email mailbox and of failing to obtain records from Bellenhaus's private foundation account trust in Liechtenstein. Now, this is important for the trial because ex-CEO Braun, in particular, accuses Bellenhaus of having stashed away millions of euros in company funds. Deerlam claims he and Statter were flooded with extensive new documents shortly before the start of the trial. Now, on day 7, despite Statter filing this motion, the proceedings continued with no decision from the court on either Deerlam's or Statter's motions. By day 9, Bellenhaus has continued, saying Wirecard, quote, had no more time for real customers as it was too busy fabricating supposed software customers and faking contracts as part of the company's greater fraud to pump up its balance sheet. Now, in his questioning by the presiding judge, Marcus Votisch, Bellenhaus testifies that the fake software contracts with customers served to, quote, improve Wirecard's results, but the alleged services had no real basis. Quote, monkeys in suits, he called the TPAs. He accused Wirecard of essentially a lack of ambition, saying that if his colleagues had just been innovative, if the company had just been innovative with respect to legitimate products, well, maybe they wouldn't all be standing in court right now. He credits his managerial colleagues' ambition and creativity for creating these false TPA partners, but that's the extent of what he credits them with. And then we get into Ollie's compensation. Good grief. Now, recall, Bellenhaus joined the Wirecard family very early on. Oliver, this comes back to your supposed reluctance to engage in fraud. 20 years of fighting and beating down your better angels? Such stamina. Bellenhaus claimed Wirecard had barely changed its name when he came over in 2002 from DZ Bank. He was allegedly a prized employee who moved up the ranks at Wirecard before being rewarded, or shunted off, depending on how one looks at it, to Dubai. Well, apparently, poor impoverished Bellenhaus was only earning just over 150,000 euros a year. For US listeners, that's roughly 170,000 a year. Ollie thought this awfully miserly. Mind you, in Germany, the average base salary for a corporate CEO is 137,000 euros. So Ollie was at the top end of the range. Now, typically, total comp for a German CEO ranges between about 100,000 and 450,000 euros a year, once you add in the bonuses and the profit sharing. But Ollie was aghast that his pay was so meagre. How did he manage to afford those pricey sports cars on only 13,000 euros a month? I wonder. At any rate, Ollie marched straight to Marschalek, oddly not to Braun, and demanded an annual salary of 950,000 euros. Or to put it another way, he asked for a 508% raise. Okay, listeners, I want you to try that on your CEO board or HR rep tomorrow. Go ahead, march into their offices, and demand a 500% raise. Let me know how it goes. Ollie told the court, quote, The salary I received at Wirecard was not appropriate for my position for a long time. Yeah, not commensurate with all his hard work sitting around playing Call of Duty on a big screen in his office. Marszalek, not surprisingly, rejected his proposed salary increase and instead offered him a one-time payment of 4.8 million euros. Demonstrating his financial prowess and keen negotiating skills, Bellenhaus agreed to it. In other words, he agreed to keep his $13,000 a month salary and get no raise, just a one-off bonus equivalent to 5 years of the requested increased salary he would not be receiving. Said one-off 4.8 million euros didn't run through Wirecard's payroll, but diverted from other company funds and dropped into Bellenhaus's foundation, e.g. private trust. In Liechtenstein, now, the trust that was formed really long before this payment, but then Ollie's been a little thin on truth on some of this, hasn't he? But Bellenhaus got even with Wirecard. Oh, yes, he stuck it to them. He told the court he didn't own any Wirecard shares, as that would have been, quote, a bad investment. Take that, Wirecard. Ollie, is this about you never fully being in with the in-crowd at Wirecard? Maybe you were only allowed to see him perpetrate fraud for the Near East office? Is that what this is about? You're getting back at Brown for never having offered you a ride in the Maybach or invited you to ride in the private elevator? Bellenhaus is questioned on day 10 by the public prosecutor's office. Now, he tells the court that the TPA business was a hermetically sealed fraud system that others within Wirecard couldn't access. Ollie, what happened to all those fraudulent contracts, do you suppose? Well, now, according to Bellenhaus, only he, Braun, and the silent von Urfer would access these fake accounts. Okay, what happened to the technician and Marszalek? Honestly, I can't keep up with his stories. Okay, so he claims only he, Braun, and the silent von Urfer would access these fake accounts. Quote, the TPA, singular now, was generally closed off. We didn't let anyone get in there. Puffing himself up a bit, Bellenhaus claimed he was solely responsible for the operational processing of Wirecard's TPA activities. So are you providing an alibi to Braun and von Urfer by saying you and you alone handled this fraud? Oh, God. Now, references to more than the 50 employees actively working on the TP side of the house was supposedly only something claimed so as to deceive the outside world. In fact, according to Bellenhaus, those folks would have worked for the Wirecard processing division. Don't you wonder if their testimony will reflect this, as we still have to hear from some of those folks? Bellenhaus also claimed that TPA's IT was never integrated into that of the greater companies. Well, finally something we can believe, because, recall, they'd outsourced the IT group to Greece and then given them nothing to do. Bellenhaus spoke of an IT parallel world of TPA. It's just like a new multiverse theory. Oh, physicists of the world, sit up and pay attention. Okay, then Bellenhaus claimed that EY had come within inches of discovering the missing money at the company when in 2019 it identified a software sales contract that was fake. Now, we all sat up, pricked up our ears here. Judge Fodish was incredulous, asking Bellenhaus, quote, so EY at that time knew that Wirecard was forging contracts? Bellenhaus says, yeah. Judge Fodish, then what happened? Weren't there consequences? Nope, says Bellenhaus. The judges are stunned. Quite frankly, so are we. Then Fodish says, on record, quote, they, meaning EY, could have handled this differently and then the whole issue would have been uncovered more than a year earlier? Bellenhaus said he engaged in some trickery to reduce the questioned right down to $2 million, which, I love this part, EY considered an insignificant amount. if it's a write-down of votes, only 2 mil, we needn't bother with it. Fake, not fake, who cares? Now, according to evidence produced during Bellenhaus's testimony, EY actually stumbled over the Singapore trustee account fraud as far back as 2016 and asked Wirecard to clarify a letter received from Rajaratnam, which said he held no monies for Wirecard or any of its subsidiaries. Oops. But Bellenhaus and now Van Urfe back in the mix. I guess it's not just Bellenhaus. So difficult to keep up with his stories. Bellenhaus and Van Urfe allegedly wordsmithed an answer that satisfied EY. And after a second piece of correspondence came from Citadel saying, oh yeah, we forgot, oops, yeah, it turned out we do hold 150 million euros for the TPA. Okay, more nails in the EY coffin, let's say. And it's funny, but just a few days after Judge Fortish expressed his absolute dismay that EY sat on these identified frauds at Wirecard, Arbus, our second most loved German regulator after BaFin, closed its investigations into 4 of the current and former EY auditors of Wirecard, 3 of whom are or were partners at EY Germany. Why? Because the EYers resigned from EY Germany in January of this year, as in a few weeks ago. Martin Dahmen resigned from EY Germany, but has stayed with EY, the family, and because he's left the German EY entity, he can't be probed by Opus. Andreas Latscher had already left EY. Remember, he went on to Deutsche Bank and then left that position as well. A third partner and a more junior auditor who had also worked on Wirecard also resigned. You see, once they handed in their public accounting licenses in Germany, Opus, under German law, could no longer investigate them and was forced to close the investigation. Opus can only investigate auditors actively enrolled as public accountants. So, ain't that convenient? Well, they walk free for now, until those EY lawsuits pick them up again. And with disclosure about EY, according to Bellenhaus's defense counsel, Florian Eder, Ollie's testimony was concluded. That's all, folks. Perhaps the most interesting part of Bellenhaus's testimony across the days was how he largely did not answer, or only evasively answered, inquiries about Wirecard Bank, suspected money laundering, and how the TPA sales worked exactly with respect to the company's marketing department. Listeners, this is telling, because really, there's minimal hard evidence to support Bellenhaus's claims about the TPA fraud. And what with those Telegram IMs missing and, well, deleted, let's be honest, and some of the key witnesses sitting in other countries and unlikely to appear at this trial, there are a lot of reasons the ultimate beneficiaries of those dirty money flows don't care if Bellenhaus's story is accurate or not, as the less scrutiny of those TPAs, the better for them. And then, finally, the court ruled on motions made by Braun and Van Urfe's respective defense counsels, right? Deerlem and Statter seeking those stays of the trial proceedings based on their allegations of prosecutorial misconduct, the mishandling of evidence, etc. Well, Judge Fortish, lead judge, read the court's decision, quote, "The chamber is convinced that the legal requirements for suspension are not met. The motions to stay were rejected." Now, the judges ruled that they didn't find any serious violation to the rule of law. And that's important. The chamber told Deerlem and Stretter that they could mount a, quote, effective defense without a suspension of proceedings. After all, said Fredish, the defense attorneys had, quote, always had the opportunity to see evidence from the police since the beginning of October 2022, but never used the opportunity. Okay, well, look, let's be realistic here. The trial started in December, so that was only 2 months lead. Admittedly, it was a lead. Among other things, the court pointed out that the expected duration of the proceedings of more than a year, in other words, we're going into 2024 here, would give the defense ample opportunity to also use defense options based on subsequently delivered file components to raise objections. In addition, Dearlam, contrary to his expressed assurances to the court, had been found to have passed along data records to an IT service provider for an evaluation. And that didn't seem to earn any points for Brown's side with the judges. Anyway, throwing them a bone, Judge Fotish admitted that the size of the case files were are extraordinarily high. However, the additional material that's been received since the beginning of November 2022, or about a month and a half before the trial began, really contain a lot of duplicates and files that are of little importance for the prosecution. As to the rest, quote, special efforts by defenders, quote, to some extent should be expected. Quote, any disadvantages that may arise will have to be compensated for by the court, says Fotish. In other words, defense counsel, pull up your socks and start burning some midnight oil getting acquainted with the volumes of exhibits and evidence. You'll have your moment in court to raise some defenses and challenge some of the evidence that's submitted. Now, the court said that whilst the investigation results that are still outstanding, for example, the requests for the legal assistance abroad, right, the MLATs, Mutual Legal Assistance Treaties, those have not come back in, right? They're still waiting for those to be answered. And that alone is not grounds for suspending the process. However, the court did agree to give the defense some time to catch up. So basically, they scheduled the next round of hearings in the matter for Wednesday, February 8th. In other words, resuming in a couple of days from now. This may be partially have been driven by Dearlam's insistence that he and the rest of the Braun defense team would, quote, not answer any questions from the defense attorneys of the other defendants, that is, for von Erfe and Bellenhaus, unless they were given a few days off to prepare. Now, the court had originally planned the next 3 days of the hearing for this purpose, but, quote, in addition, all those involved in the proceedings should be given the opportunity to work through the most recently received file components, said the judges. And according to the court, there is no appeal against the denial of these motions. However, the decision could have repercussions after a verdict. According to litigants, defense attorneys could seek to challenge a subsequent ruling by citing the rejection of their motions. We may be going to, 2025. Can we go the distance? And now we're certainly unlikely to hear Brown's opening statement until much later this month. He dreamed that he stood in a shadowy court where the snark with a glass in its eye, dressed in gown bands and a wig, was defending a pig on the charge of deserting its sty. In the matter of treason, the pig would appear to have aided but scarcely abetted, while the charge of insolvency fails. It is clear, if you grant the plea, never indebted. Extra points to the listeners who can name the source of that little ditty. That's all for today's episode. Keeping in mind Bellenhaus, Wirecard Bank in Ireland, Wookie and TPAs, tune in for episode 38, The Man Behind the Curtain, to hear about another important case involving Wirecard with a surprising and positive outcome. I'm Mikhail Gordon. You've been listening to Lies, Spies and Corporate Crimes, the Wirecard Saga podcast. My thanks to the Compliance Podcast Network, to all of you listeners, of course, and the captain steering the good ship CPN, Tom Fox. I'll meet you back here, same time, same place, next week.
This is Tom Fox. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wirecard Saga. The Wirecard Saga is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. I hope you will join us again for our next episode.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.